From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Eric Dezenhall is just the kind of writer that you want in the cutting edge tent. He's a damage control expert and the CEO of Dezenhall Resources, a nationally recognized communications firm. And he's written 2 nonfiction books on crisis communications, and he lectures frequently on that topic. But we're fortunate today to have him here to talk about his fast-paced, enthralling fiction. He's the author of 6 novels, including Jackie Disaster and Spinning Dixie. Eric started writing as a little kid about the people in his New Jersey neighborhood, people with names like Cherry Hill Fats, Al Pajamas, and Nicky the Crow. And all that, those names sound like found poetry, don't they? Or maybe like children's book characters. And Eric and I were actually joking that he might have a children's book in him. So Eric started writing in longhand as a kid, and he still prefers writing all his first drafts in longhand. Booklist has praised Eric's latest novel, The Devil Himself, as fascinating, and called it entertaining home-front espionage. This carefully researched historical novel is based on the true story of the U.S. Navy's collaboration with organized crime during World War II. So see what I mean about cutting edge. The novel has already been optioned for film. And so to the book itself, Eric has brought the same curiosity and keen observation that galvanized his boyhood writings about the vivid characters who were his childhood neighbors. So join me in welcoming Eric Dezenhall.
Thank you. I'm going to do my best to make all of this hearable. I appreciate the colorful introduction, Mary. I should mention that the only other colorful introduction I've gotten like that is I was speaking to a business group years ago, and the guy introducing me, I think, had a little bit much to drink. And he was looking at my business's letterhead, which read Dezenhall Resources, Washington, and introduced me as Denzel Washington. I'm sure you're wondering how I manage my career as an Academy Award-winning actor, along with the other things. But today we're going to talk about gangsters. We're going to talk about gangsters and spies. Let me first ask you to imagine the following. There is a fire in the sky over the Hudson River. People are running in the streets covered in ash and soot. There are clouds of black smoke wafting through the towers in lower Manhattan. People can't see out the windows. There are people reporting planes crashing into buildings and dropping bombs. Rescue workers are flooding into lower Manhattan. People are hysterically calling their relatives. We've apparently been attacked. But who did it? You're probably, and people want revenge immediately. You're probably thinking about 9/11, 2001, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about February 9th, 1942. What happened was the largest cruise ship in the world, a ship called the Normandy, which was comfortably bigger than the Titanic, caught fire, blew up, and capsized at Pier 88 in Manhattan. The Normandy was a French ship that had been seized by the United States upon the fall of France to the Nazis. And the first theory about what had happened was that this was Nazi sabotage. This was a few weeks after Pearl Harbor, and the suspicion was that the Nazis had been able to penetrate the waterfront. And one of the theories was that perhaps the Italian Americans, who were the primary ethnic group on the waterfront, were possibly loyal to Mussolini, which could explain what happened there. Now, there's not a lot of evidence that was the case, but we all know what happens in times of war. You suspect certain ethnic groups that you may be adverse to in other parts of the world. Well, this was actually, the theory of Nazi sabotage was actually quite reasonable. U-boats had been spotted in the Hudson River. Nazi U-boats in 1942 had killed more American sailors than died at Pearl Harbor. There was also a situation in World War I where the Germans successfully blew up a munitions storage facility in New York Harbor, destroying, in today's amount, would be about $250 million in munitions. It was an explosion that was felt as far away as Philadelphia. Needless to say, the Navy was in a lot of trouble. Pearl Harbor, the Navy chiefs, had been fired by Roosevelt, and now you have the New York waterfront was breached. FDR was furious, and he wanted to know how this could have happened. And a lot of this was very personal for him, because the famous ship, the USS Arizona, that sunk in Pearl Harbor, was personally authorized, christened by Roosevelt when he was Assistant Secretary of the Navy in World War I. Well, so he tells the Navy, you need to go to the docks and figure out what's going on here. So he does. So the Navy goes to the docks, and they are asked for their assistance. The longshoremen on the New York docks immediately tell the Navy where to go. They have no interest in helping out. And the theories, of course, at the time were, did this have to do with the fact that a lot of the longshoremen, which was mob-controlled, were Italian, and were the Italians loyal to Mussolini? But there's an actual better explanation. The kind of guys who worked on the dock are not the kind of guys who want to cooperate with men in uniform, who are asking them to snitch. But still, the problem remains, how do we secure the waterfront? Well, a man named Commander Charles Radcliffe Huffington of Naval Intelligence is appointed. He is appointed to be the guy who secures the East Coast from the Nazis. So what does he do? Given that organized crime controls the waterfront, he goes to the New York City prosecutor's office, and he finds a prosecutor who says to him, look, and keep in mind that the prosecutors in New York, a lot of them were Jewish guys who had been rejected from the top law firms, and I'm going to identify who the lead prosecutor was in a few minutes. And the lead prosecutor listens to the naval commander, and he says, there's two men you need to talk to. One of those men is named Meyer Lansky. And just as an aside, I've known Meyer's family for many, many years. Our families go way back, and I had access to his personal recollections, and it turns out he kept a diary. And I will get into some of that in a bit. But the reasons why this prosecutor recommended Meyer Lansky, he said to the commander, first of all, you need to know that this Lansky fellow attacked the German-American Nazi sympathizing Bund. There, believe it or not, Nazi sympathizers had a huge stronghold in New York. Now, that's unbelievable to believe today that the Nazis were active in New York, but they were through an organization called the German-American Bund. Well, a rabbi initially in New York said, you know something, this was in the late 30s, early 40s, we need to sit down with these Bund members and have an exchange of dialogue with them so they understand our position. Your classic progressive Jewish viewpoint that everything can be discussed. Well, that didn't work out so well. And that was when the rabbi came to Meyer Lansky who put together a group of friends, including Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, Louis Lepke Buckhalter, and Jewish mobsters who went after the Bund and beat them into submission. There were other reasons why the Bund collapsed, including the fact that the Nazi Bund leader in New York turned out to be the Bernie Madoff of Nazis. He had embezzled the Bund's money and the Bund collapsed, and not to mention the fact that as time went by, it wasn't really a good thing to be a Nazi sympathizer in New York. The second thing the prosecutor told the Navy commander was that Meyer Lansky was a Russian Jewish immigrant who was very concerned about what was happening to the Jews of Eastern Europe. Third, the commander was told Meyer Lansky attempted to enlist for combat in the Army. He was willing to leave his business to join combat in the Army, but he had been declined because of his height. He was 5'4", and his age, he was 40. Not only that, the commander was told some of the other Jewish racketeers had successfully enlisted in the Army. Mo Dalitz of Cleveland served in the Army in combat. A Minneapolis gangster named Davy Berman went to Canada and joined the Canadian Air Force, the Canadian Army, after he was turned down because of his criminal record in the United States, as did several of the Jewish gangsters. Meyer, however, was turned away for the reasons I said. And Commander Huffington was warned. He said, this is a different kind of mobster, I'm warning you. But if you can't get cooperation from the Italians, let's go to the Jewish guys first and see what they can do. And there was another reason they reached out to Meyer, which I'll get to in a minute. I've been asked why I wrote The Devil Himself as historical fiction rather than as a straight nonfiction history book. And there's two reasons for that. Number one, there are things you can do in fiction that you can't do in nonfiction. In fiction, you're allowed to write dialogue. You're allowed to get into the minds of the main characters without being accused of making things up, because you are admitting you are making up the dialogue based on true history. But I don't know. I was born in 1962. How do I know what Meyer and Bugsy said to a naval commander in 1942? These guys didn't exactly keep detailed records. The second reason why I wrote the book as historical fiction is I wanted the freedom to be discreet. I wanted the freedom not to answer certain questions. I wanted the freedom to not be specific about who gave me what information and when, because I was helped out tremendously by people in Meyer's world. I was helped out by friends in the intelligence community who were able to get me documents that had never been made public. And if you write a book as nonfiction, you have to footnote everything. What I do in the book is I say at the beginning of the end what's fictionalized and what is fact. But among the treasures that were found, when Meyer's wife Teddy died in 1998, their granddaughter called me and said, "You're not going to believe this, he kept a diary." And I was fascinated by this, and these were things that he hadn't discussed with his family or friends when he was alive. He died in 1983, and I went down and I found all of his writings, which were fascinating. But this was well before 9/11, and this story did not come into focus until 9/11. When it began to dawn on me, I lost a friend in the Pentagon attack, Barbara Olson, and I remember thinking, what are we going to be willing to do to deal with this threat? And if you look historically, and this World War II story tells you some of what we were willing to do to deal with the Nazis, but look back even further in the War of 1812, when General Andrew Jackson was having problems in New Orleans with the British, they reached out to Jean Lafitte, the pirate. And this is what we do in times like this. But moving back to this story, There was another reason the Navy reached out to Meyer Lansky, because he had a business partner who was greatly respected among the Italians. And that man's name was Salvatore Lucania, better known as Charles Lucky Luciano. And Luciano was doing basically a life sentence in Dannemora prison up on the Canadian-New York border. And as much as clout as Meyer had with some of the Italians, he couldn't go marching onto the docks, which were not his turf, by the way, and start telling Italians what to do. They needed Luciano, but he was in prison. And so Commander Huffington meets with Meyer Lansky at a restaurant called Longchamps in New York. And Huffington is stunned because he's expecting this knuckle-dragging character to walk in instead of this 5'4" guy in a conservative suit who had just come from his math tutor. Meyer, when some of his friends spent the evening carousing, Meyer would hire professors from Columbia University to tutor him. And so immediately Commander Huffington knew he was dealing with a different type of character. So Huffington gives him his pitch. I'm the head of naval intelligence in New York. The mafia controls the waterfront. We need help penetrating Nazi spies. Will you help? And Meyer listens to this and he says, well, this is very interesting, Commander. Let me just first set you straight about something. There is no mafia. That's a wives' tale. It's very offensive to the Italians. And as for me, I'm just a small investor. I'm in the music business. I'm not somebody who has a lot of power or influence, but in my own small way, I'm happy to help if I can. But what I want to know is, if I am able to help you, would such a person be considered a patriot? And this is a very, very important point, because what made working with these guys different than just generically working with thugs and criminals is the thing that these guys, Meyer, my own grandfather, I mean, I was sat down when it was time to go to college by one of my uncles who had done time, and I was told in no uncertain terms, you are going to be a classy American and you're going to an Ivy League school, okay? And so the commander says to Meyer, whoever helps us would be considered a patriot. Okay, well, now we have the issue of my friend Charlie. Why should he help? The government put him in jail for 30 to 50 years on a dubious charge. And the commander says to Meyer, well, what do you suggest we do to get his help? And he says, all I can tell you right now is you never go to a Sicilian empty-handed. In the middle of the night, Charles Lucky Luciano is awakened by the warden of the Dannemora prison. He is told to put his items in a box, and they stuff him into a jail paddy wagon and take him somewhere unknown. Luciano doesn't know what's happening. He thinks, he's been in jail 7 years, he thinks that they're going to just execute him or something. So he walks into a new, nicer prison called Clinton Correctional Facility. And he walks in and is escorted into a meeting room where there are these beautiful Italian and Jewish delicacies and Meyer Lansky and their lawyer, Moses Polikoff, waiting for him. And Luciano can't believe it. He's been in a cell for 7 years, and he sees Meyer. There's a lot of hugging. What's going on here? And and Meyer says, well, first of all, they made some sort of joke about, do you want the pumpernickel? Do you want rye? What do you want? And once they get comfortable, Luciano says, I can't believe I'm in this nicer prison. And Meyer says, well, that's the point. And here's what we need. And Meyer proceeds to explain to him. He says, do you know that big ship that blew up in New York Harbor a few weeks ago? Yeah. Well, apparently they think it's the Nazis. And Luciano goes, Nazis? I figured that was one of our guys. And Meyer says, bite your tongue with that. Stop with that. And one of the interesting things is Lansky, who was self-educated, had a very thick Brooklyn accent. People think of Lansky as he was represented by Lee Strasberg in The Godfather Part 2 as Hyman Roth, with this sort of stereotypical meek Jewish New Yorker. I'm a retired investor living on a pension. That's not how Meyer Lansky spoke. Meyer Lansky would have said, I'm a retired investor living on a pension. But Luciano was barely literate and he was very bright, but had trouble stringing a sentence together. And Meyer says, and Luciano says, look, I'm willing to help with the Italians, but what's in it for me? And Meyer says, I've thought about this. You're already in a nicer place. Maybe if we can show value to the Navy, we can get you out of here. And so Luciano says, fine, I'll do it. Now, was not all altruism. Luciano is now allowed to meet with his capos in prison. And it is absolutely documented that his men would come and visit him, Meyer would visit him, his lawyers would visit him. It's, you hear all these things that mob guys run their empires from prison. Not so easy, okay? But when you're allowed to have people come and visit you and spend time in the warden's office, it works. What resulted from this was a campaign of vigilance and intimidation, whereby the Navy guys, where the guys on the waterfront were told, you're going to look out for Nazi spies, and you're going to tell them what you're going to tell the Navy whatever they need to know. Part of this program was supplemented by Meyer and his guys getting tips about Nazi sympathizers who suddenly went missing in New York. And you'll see some of this in the book, and I'll get to toward the end of my talk what is documented and what's not. But among the things, in one of the great coincidences of history that I deal with in the book, the most powerful journalist in the country at that time was Walter Winchell, very close to Roosevelt. Who is Winchell's next door neighbor at the Majestic House in Manhattan? Meyer Lansky. And among the things they did was when Winchell needed a column, Meyer would help him out by saying, you know what, we just found some Nazis. I'm going to send the Murder Inc. guys down from Brownsville to beat them up. You can get some photos and a good story about how we're contributing to the war effort. And Winchell was very game for it, and he provided some good propaganda. Well, in a few months after this, Nazis landed in New York and Jacksonville. And they landed with about $170,000 in cash and plans to blow up chemical plants, bridges, highways, industrial facilities. And the Coast Guard who found them, because they were not the brightest of the Nazis, that he just died a few days ago at the age of 90, a man named John Cullen. And the lead Nazi, a man named George Dash, turned himself in almost immediately to J. Edgar Hoover. Because they realized that, the other thing I forgot to mention is, in addition to blowing up these facilities I mentioned, was a list of Jewish-owned department stores. Well, the lead Nazi turns himself in, and most of them were caught legitimately through the FBI, but some of these guys began going to hotels in New York and started partying. Well, the unions that controlled the waiters and the bartenders belonged to Meyer's partner, Frank Costello, and they proceeded to drop a dime to the authorities that we've got some German-speaking guys at hotels talking about their plans, and the FBI rounded them up and captured them. You can read the Nazi saboteurs case is pretty well known. The mob angle is somewhat less well known. Roosevelt, who has gone down in history as a great liberal, wanted to execute them immediately. And he is at Camp David, which was then called Shangri-La, picking up the phone and saying, did you execute these guys yet? And the Attorney General is going, Mr. President, you can't just do that. There needs to be due process. And Roosevelt said, no, there doesn't. Just, I'm the president. Just kill them now. And it couldn't happen, but what ended up happening is in one of the fastest Supreme Court cases in history, the Supreme Court reviewed this, and 6 of the 8 of the Nazis who were in a holding cell here in D.C. were awakened one morning and executed. 2 of them were had longer prison sentences due to their cooperation. In any event, time goes by and Luciano is still in prison going, hello, you know, I'm still here. I need your help. And Meyer is under pressure. And Meyer says to him, look, I think we still need to show the government more value. And Luciano is very impatient, but Meyer has an idea. He sits down with Commander Huffington, with whom he has become very close. And he says, Commander, I've been reading that there's some thoughts about invading Sicily. And the commander says, well, it's been in the papers, yeah. And Meyer says, what do you know about Sicilians? Not a lot. Well, Commander, they don't like being invaded. They get invaded a lot. And when General Patton or whoever's men come ashore, the Sicilians are going to say, oh, General, welcome. Let me take you to the Nazis. They're over there. Or they're going to go, oh, General, welcome. The Nazis are over there. This way we'll be right. This way we'll be wrong. When the Allies land in Sicily, do you want them to have good information or do you want them to have bad information? And obviously the commander says good information. Well, Luciano still in prison and Meyer round up a lot of Sicilian immigrants, as well as Sicilians who are leaders of the Sicilian Americans. One man named Alfieri, another man named Marzullo. Famously, the OSS had a guy named Max Corvo. And Sicilian Americans were very active in helping to prepare the invasion. And the Sicilians were able to help the Allies in different ways. One of my favorite anecdotes is the Nazis had to hire Sicilian mafia guys to mine the beaches. And so they would mine the beaches, and when the Nazis went to bed, they would dig them up. And so the Sicilian invasion was very, very successful. And Luciano got closer and closer to his freedom. One of the problems was the only thing worse than if this program failed, what happens if it succeeds? You're now in business with the mafia. And at the very end of the campaign, they sent Commander Huffington, the government sent Huffington to Iwo Jima, hoping he would be killed. He was not killed. He was severely injured. But the government had a problem on their hands because now they have this partnership with the mafia. Meyer needs to spring Luciano. The Navy attempts to double deal them and say, we're not going to do anything for him. I won't tell you what Meyer said to the Navy, because it's in the book. But the result was when the Navy and the government were threatened with exposure, Luciano was promptly deported, freed. His sentence was commuted, and he spent the rest of his life a free man, but in Italy. He kind of blew any chance to come back to America when a few years after he was deported, he turns up in Havana with Frank Sinatra and a plane load of hookers, which infuriated the American government that they had freed him. But Meyer was very, very proud of his wartime service. And in one of my favorite anecdotes, the homicidal gangster Albert Anastasia said to Meyer, someday my son's going to run the waterfront. And Meyer said, that's nice, my son works at NASA. Which is true. Meyer was so enthralled with his Navy experience that he sent his son Paul to West Point. And Paul graduated with honors. He worked on the Apollo space program and was one of the first advisors in Vietnam. The question then remains, did this program work? How much of this is folklore? How much of it is fact? Well, we do know this. Domestic sabotage stopped. Do we know that this program I'm talking about was the reason why? We don't. But if given the choice between having Nazis having Bugsy Siegel chasing them through lower Manhattan and not having that, which is better, okay? Second, where history is clearer is about the Sicilian campaign. We are far more sure that the Sicilian effort I just talked about happened because the Sicilian operatives have admitted this program. What's less clear is what happened in New York. This book, this book is dedicated to my in-laws. My father-in-law served in World War II. It's also dedicated to my father-in-law's best friend, a man named Bill McWorkman, who was one of the young soldiers who liberated Dachau. And he had been unaware. The government denied this whole program for about 40 years. Shortly before Meyer's death, they admitted that it happened. And I asked Bill McWorkman, again, this is the young soldier who liberated Dachau. He knew I was working on this book. He knew I knew the Lanskys. And I said, look, you're the most honorable, straight-up, all-American guy I know. How do you feel that the government reached out to these guys? And he said, we were at war. If you saw what I saw at Dachau, you wouldn't give a damn who we reached out to. And in one of the interesting quotes I'll read you that's in the book, I'll talk to anybody, a priest, a bank manager, a gangster, the devil himself, the name of the book, if I can get the information I need. And that was from Commander Huffington. Another quote, if the chief of police makes a deal with the leading gangsters and the deal results in no more holdups, the chief of police will be called a great man. But if the gangsters don't live up to their word, the chief of police will go to jail. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And that tells you, and this book came together for me very much after 9/11. Interestingly enough, the Normandy probably was not blown up by the Nazis. It was probably an accidental fire that happened because we were so ill prepared for war that it was all very catch as catch can and thrown together. You had life preservers next to blow torches. It was probably just that, but still, this was what Alfred Hitchcock would call the MacGuffin, the thing that got the program going. And so that is the true history, and what you'll see in The Devil Himself is how I attempted to flesh out the two heroes of the book, if you can call them that. Certainly Commander Huffington is a hero, and a lot of the things that Meyer had told friends and family and reflected emotionally, I very much wanted to tell his story, which was easier to do fictionally. So with that, I thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Oh, they have a Barnes & Noble at the pavilion here. They have it for sale at the Barnes & Noble. My name is Dezenhall, and the book is The Devil Himself. Yes. I saw a hand somewhere, but... Yes. Do you want to go to the podium so people could hear your question?
Two questions.
Yes.
Did this group, Meyer Lansky and his fellows, did they end up in Havana running the casino?
Oh, yeah.
And then is the story about the little town of Appalachia, New York, is that true?
Oh, yes. First of all, Meyer's best days were ahead of him. Even though he was, a lot of what's heard about Meyer is legend. I mean, if you see The Godfather Part 2, Hyman Roth, the idea he had $300 million, no, he didn't. Trust me, these guys don't end up with fortunes like that. But Meyer really was, Meyer Lansky in Havana. He truly was the de facto president of that country. In fact, I did a book signing in Miami Beach a few days ago, and all of the Italian and Jewish racketeers' families who ran Cuba showed up, and they're still ticked off. I mean, because that was where they had wanted to clean up their fortunes. Because a lot of families, the Annenbergs, the Pritzkers, the Bronfmans, the Kennedys, they had their origins in racketeering activity. But they went straight. Meyer thought he was going to go straight in Havana, which was legal. But when he lost, he invested something like 17 million of his own money in the 40s and 50s in Havana. That was real money then. But when they left, they lost it. Second, your second question about the Appalachian Conference in New York that's referred to in the movies, it really did happen. In fact, when I was a kid, my grandfather would sit in the backyard with a man we called Uncle Dominic. And I didn't know for 20 years that Uncle Dominic was the Don. My grandfather was Jewish, and Uncle Dominic, who wasn't a real uncle, was Italian. I didn't know that they had been in the liquor business together. But Uncle Dominic was one of the people arrested at the Appalachian Conference, which was the first time people said that J. Edgar Hoover didn't go after the mafia because they had a picture of him in a dress or something ridiculous like that. The real reason he didn't go after the mafia is it was far more profitable to go after communists and bank robbers. But after the Appalachian Conference in New York, where 50 Italian mobsters were arrested, Hoover had no choice and began going after them. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello. This seems like the kind of book where, like, after you write it, the author gets, strange calls or letters or outreach from people, either legitimately or just being weird. Say, well, I was there, I can tell you this. Have you, if the book's been out that long, but are you getting those sorts of, do you get notes and calls?
There is no, people have asked me, because of what you write about, are you afraid of the mafia? Actually, the mafia, all the principles in this book are long gone. And mob guys love these, they love this stuff. The people I'm scared of are these mafia fanatics. These people are crazy because, to your point, they will get in touch with you and go, Bugsy Siegel wasn't killed with a 357. He was killed with a 30-30 carbine. Okay, and they all claim to have a special knowledge of how it really went down, and it's very creepy. So I'm far less concerned about the mafia than I am the crazy emails I get from people who claim to know who killed who, which I certainly don't. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
My grandfather was a cop in New York City about this time, and I remember him speaking about some of the same names you did. Was there any communication that included the New York City Police Department working with the mafia and the Navy, or was it strictly Navy?
It was very segmented. If the police force was involved, I don't know about it. I think that even the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, people think that this was a CIA program. It really wasn't. It was naval intelligence. It doesn't mean that the NYPD wasn't involved. It just means I don't know about it if they were. Yes, sir.
I'm wondering if you could tell us more about the explosion, how many people died, did the boat sink?
Yes.
And you also indicated you were going to say what was fictional in the book and what.
Oh, and the prosecutor, I failed to mention that. I'll do that as quickly as I can. The ship was, only one person died, unbelievably. A lot were injured. It caught fire, it capsized, and you could go on the internet and you can see this huge ship. It looks like a toy, but what you have to realize, it was about 1,100 feet long as compared to the Titanic, which was 800. The prosecutor who encouraged the Navy to go to Meyer-Lansky was a man named Murray Gurfein, who became the judge in the Pentagon Papers case. But in terms of what's true and what's not, the broad brushes of this program are true. The parts that the part that you have to take with some distance is the actual dialogue, because while I can claim I know what happened, I can't look you in the eye and say, word for word, we know what happened. But I can tell you some of Meyer's dialogue was from things in his diary, things that he said to friends and family, and his relationship with Bugsy Siegel was very much what he told, but I wrote the dialogue.
And did your book trigger any, I guess, curiosity, so to speak, from the intelligence community about,
From who?
from the intelligence community here? Did they?
Oh, actually, yeah. It's interesting. The intelligence community and historians don't like this story. You will hear people who will say this never happened. It's all BS. The fact is there are things that are BS. There are stories that greatly exaggerate the mafia's contributions. There's a story that Lucky Luciano stormed ashore at Sicily beside General Patton. No, it never happened. And so there is a tremendous amount of exaggeration. But the intelligence community was very, very interested in this because they had no access to these mob guys' families. And so I was very open to work with law enforcement every step of the way to let them know what I had. Thank you. 2 minutes? Yeah, well, I guess one more question.
Okay. Years ago, my dad told me that you mentioned that J. Edgar Hoover, they had a picture of J. Edgar Hoover wearing a dress, something like that. So
Yeah,
he would leave them alone. My dad once told me years ago that J. Edgar Hoover was a homosexual. True, false?
The specific allegation of Hoover in a dress came from a writer named Anthony Summers, who wrote a book around 1990 about J. Edgar Hoover, and he claimed that Meyer Lansky had a photo of Hoover in a dress in his safe deposit box. I've been in Meyer's safe deposit box. There is no picture of J. Edgar Hoover in a dress, number one. Number two, if Meyer had something on Hoover, don't you think it would have been a good time to use it before Hoover chased Lansky out of the country in 1970? That would have been a good time to use it. As to Hoover's sexual preference, who knows? But one thing's for sure, he was so obsessed with his image that I guarantee you he was not going to society parties dressed in Halston. Gay, who's straight, we don't know what happens in someone's private life. He very well may have been, but he certainly would not have put himself in a position where he was, cross-dressing. My belief is that Hoover, who was a big gambler, by the way, he was a bureaucrat, and bureaucrats go after easy wins. And it was easy to go after communists and John Dillinger. The thing about the mob is it's not a corporation. On any given day, I make a deal with you, you make a deal with her. There was just no percentage in it until the Appalachian Conference where they found them all. Thank you. Is that it? Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.